This is a webcast for United States History, American Imperialism Unit, SI number 8. As you can see here, we're starting with this slide that we've seen repetitively throughout the unit, showing you the American imperialism era timeline, including the key year of 1898, which kind of launches us into this American interventionist position and point of view. We also have these American presidents along the timeline. We've focused on William McKinley quite a bit in the unit, and now we're going to focus on Teddy Roosevelt. All right, Teddy Roosevelt is one of 4 presidents etched at Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. So we've taken some focal point interest in George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln in first semester, and now want to give you some background on the man of Theodore Roosevelt and his life and his presidency. If he's etched in Mount Rushmore with the other 3 presidents, he must have done something noteworthy to be included. Here's a picture of Teddy Roosevelt. It's kind of an iconic image. You see Teddy Roosevelt with the big smile, the big teeth, the round spectacles. He is a larger than life individual. Big laugh, excellent sense of humor, very active. He's the type of guy that when he comes in the room, he just kind of sucks all the attention to himself. There's an interesting link here to the left if you're interested. The musical tribute that was written during Teddy Roosevelt's life. And it has some footage that goes along with the song, some still images as well as some video footage, including some video footage of Teddy Roosevelt flying with the Wright brothers. Teddy Roosevelt was the first president of the United States to enjoy the sensation of flight. So you might want to check that out. It's only 2 minutes long. It's pretty good. So we want to talk about Teddy Roosevelt as a young boy. You can see here he's named after his father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr. And this quote is an important quote to kind of work through a little bit. You can see in the quote that Teddy Roosevelt's father acknowledges that Teddy Roosevelt has a sharp mind, but that his body is weak. And the encouragement of the father is, the challenge of the father is that Theodore Roosevelt Jr. needed to make something of his body in order to be able to take advantage of the natural intellectual giftedness that he was already displaying. Teddy Roosevelt was a sufferer of asthma during his youth. He spent quite a lot of time infirmed in bed with struggles breathing. And so Teddy Roosevelt takes the father's challenge to heart and really goes through a process from a young boy into the rest of his life of being very vigorous in terms of physical activity. And he begins to work out, literally, starting with kind of the early days of barbells and dumbbells, of weightlifting, and a lot of outdoor physical activity to be able to build up his body so that he could overcome the trials of his asthma. As you can see in this image, he does become kind of a strapping physical specimen. Love the lamb chops also. Awesome facial hair. These are pictures of Teddy Roosevelt Jr. when he was a college student at the University of Harvard, which shows two things. One, he has built up his body. He's able to overcome his ailment of asthma, and of course he's at Harvard, which indicates that he is this sharp-minded intellect that his father identified when he was a boy. After Harvard, he will marry Alice, but on Valentine's Day of February 14th, 1884, Teddy Roosevelt experiences great loss. His wife Alice will die on Valentine's Day, 2 days after giving birth to their first child, a daughter. And amazingly, the same exact day, in the same exact house, Teddy Roosevelt loses his mother, Martha. Martha had been sick for some time, so wasn't a great surprise of her death. Of course, um, disturbing certainly that she died. But on the same exact day, Teddy Roosevelt loses arguably the two most important people in his entire life. And as you can imagine, this absolutely shattered Teddy's world, flipped him upside down. I mean, just read the tribute that he wrote commemorating the life of his dearly departed wife, Alice. Teddy Roosevelt kept a journal, not uncommon in that time and before. Many people journal. That's why we have such great historical records. But he could not muster much strength to write much about this fateful day, February 14th, 1884. All he could do is strike an X on the page and write this line, "The light has gone out of my life." He will name this firstborn daughter Alice in honor of his wife, who he lost when she was only 22 years old. So what do you do when your life has been shattered? You've lost two very important people in your life. Well, for Teddy Roosevelt, he passed on the custody of his newborn infant daughter to his sister, and he moved out west. Teddy Roosevelt had a ranch out in North Dakota, and so he lived out on his ranch, living kind of the outdoor woodsman cowboy life. You can see here in this classic image of Teddy Roosevelt just kind of adapting to the Western wear of clothing and his rifle and his knife blade in his belt. Here atop of his horse. This is a classic image of Teddy Roosevelt. Had apprehended three outlaws, and held them at gunpoint until the authorities arrived. So you can see, even though the frontier ends in 1890, still a lot of open space and wild living there in the West that Teddy Roosevelt is embracing, and does so as a way to try to heal his broken heart. He will return to New York. He will, of course, resume custody of his daughter Alice. He will begin his public servant life by entering into New York politics. And as you can see in this image, he does remarry and carries on family life with Edith Roosevelt. Here's some pictures of Teddy Roosevelt. This one showing you Teddy behind the desk as the New York Police Commissioner in 1895. Kind of uses that as a springboard to the federal position as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy in 1897. And then something momentous happens in 1898. We have the beginnings of the Spanish-American War. And so he resigns his job as the Assistant Secretary of Navy to be able to go recruit and form a volunteer cavalry unit known as the Rough Riders, which will eventually be deployed to Cuba during the Spanish-American War. You can see Teddy Roosevelt in this photograph in the red oval with the Rough Riders, this unit that he helped recruit. And the other image is Colonel Roosevelt. Now, Teddy Roosevelt was already a well-known figure because he's from the wealthy Roosevelt clan. He was a public servant in an important city of New York, a federal official, Assistant Secretary of the Navy. To give all of that up and then to go fight in Cuba during the Spanish-American War really caught the attention of journalists. So it was a story that they monitored quite a bit. He survives the war and comes back to resume life in the United States. And of course, because of this war hero status, he was asked to join William McKinley and the Republican Party ticket to run in the upcoming presidential election as the vice president running mate for McKinley. And they win. In 1900, he's the vice president, serving in the executive branch of the federal government. Now here, this red question, what happened to McKinley, is an important one because the answer to this question is going to have tremendous implications on the life and political career of Teddy Roosevelt. The answer to the question is McKinley is assassinated. He's shot. William McKinley was invited as President of the United States to the Pan American Exposition. It's kind of this fair event in Buffalo, New York. And on this particular day of September 14th, 1901, he was standing in this exhibit in this building, the Temple of Music, where he was greeting American tourists. There was a waiting line that developed and people standing in line to be able to approach the president, shake his hand, and offer a greeting. And so we have this character, Leon Kosgos, in this waiting line, and as he approaches the president, he has his hand wrapped in a cloth napkin, which was concealing a handgun. And instead of shaking the hand of William McKinley, he shot him twice. And the second bullet lodged in McKinley's abdomen and was not able to be removed. And of course, the area became gangrene and infected, and McKinley lost his life. So we now have the third president of the United States that has been killed by an assassin's bullet. This Leon Kolgos is an interesting character. He's an anarchist. He was born in Michigan of Polish descent, part of the working class of the Gilded Age, and really became disillusioned with the United States, saw that the society was really being divided between the haves, the wealthy class, and the have-nots, the working class. And he started dabbling in the anarchist worldview, which really was being developed in Europe at this time and kind of trickling over to the United States. And when he lost his job, really started kind of in full force accepting the principles of anarchy and anarchism. And he came to the belief that if there was going to be any social and economic change for the working class, that the federal government system needed to be altered, and he felt compelled to initiate that type of change and revolution by killing the President of the United States. So what that means for Teddy Roosevelt is that being the vice president, he would be now assuming the role of the presidency. So he completes the term, almost the entire term of William McKinley, and then on his own runs for president and is elected popularly, easily in 1904 and completes a term there. And during these essentially 2 terms in office, he really becomes one of the most popular presidents that we've ever had in our history, kind of giving you a clue of why he's etched in stone at Mount Rushmore. And there were many people that were pushing him to run for a 3rd term in office. In fact, due to his popularity, had he formally run, he would have been elected certainly a 3rd time. But he chooses not to run for a 3rd term, and the question there is why. And of course, this goes back to George Washington. George Washington setting up the precedent that presidents leave office after completing a 2nd term became kind of an overwhelming duty for Teddy Roosevelt. So he retires after the 2nd term, and he will go on a worldwide hunting expedition. Now, I need to tell you, he does 4 years later try for a 3rd term, but that's another story that we'll cover in another SI. Over, under, or through, but never around. This becomes kind of a life philosophy for Teddy Roosevelt. It's a phrase that he spoke, and particularly to his children. Here you can see his 2nd wife, Edith. This is his oldest daughter, Alice, from his 1st wife. And you can see he had another daughter and then 4 sons with Edith. So quite a clan here. These kids growing up in the White House. And Teddy Roosevelt was famous for taking his children on these long hikes and outdoor activities. Even when they were in that White House, they would go out, exit the lawn, and enter into some open space into Washington, D.C. It's not the Washington, D.C. that we know of and have experienced with the more urban development, but even when they were on vacations, if they were out on these walks and hikes, if they came to an obstacle, a fallen tree, a pond, anything, it was always over, under, or through, but we never go around it. So he kind of raised and reared his children with this type of philosophy. And this, of course, comes from this idea of having to make his body to be able to, overcome his childhood infirmities. And it really created this worldview and personality of strength and aggression. And so you can take this over, under, or through, but never around life philosophy, and it really links directly to the big stick foreign policy initiatives that he carried out as a president. Some more pictures of Teddy Roosevelt. You can see him here riding horseback, and equestrian was something that he was expert at. He's probably one of the most physically gifted and athletic presidents that we've ever had in the White House. And of course, we have the teddy bear, right? Coming back from this story, I want to remind you, he was on a hunting expedition during his presidency, and the trip organizers were getting fearful that they weren't finding any bear, and so somebody wrangled up this young infirmed bear cub, and Teddy Roosevelt ordered that the cub be released. He didn't have the heart to shoot it, and of course that kind of connected with the enterprise of the teddy bear. It becomes a popular American toy that we grew up with. Teddy Roosevelt's an accomplished writer. Look at all these titles that he wrote throughout his life. Again, showing that he had a sharp intellectual mind. The critics will note that he was an expert author and tackled some quite a few different topics that he was expert in, whether they be histories or he was an expert in wildlife and vegetation and so forth. So he had kind of an eclectic interest that he wrote about. So now we get to SI-8 and really get to dig in here about his presidency and this idea of the big stick foreign policy model that he utilized. All three of these political cartoons showcasing Teddy Roosevelt show the big stick. You see this club with TR. We have the Billy Club, the police officer, um, big stick emphasis there. And here we have a sword, but it's the same idea, right? And so we want to get a handle of what this big stick foreign policy is all about. So the big stick comes from this African proverb that Teddy Roosevelt liked to quote, "Speak softly and carry a big stick and you will go far." So we take this phrase big stick and we translate that to what it means for us in this history is the United States military force. And Teddy Roosevelt not only helped to develop the funding and the construction of the Great White Fleet, this new impressive navy that the United States had developed, but it was the utilization of these military assets to be able to serve and protect the United States interests globally. And it really asserts the United States as an international police force, which is a role that we kind of see and understand in our lifetimes. But we're now seeing that that role was being carved out really for the first time during the age of imperialism and under the presidency of Teddy Roosevelt. We can see the big stick foreign policy model in relationship to the story of the building of a Western Hemisphere canal. You can see here in this map, there's two stars here located in Nicaragua and also in Panama. And when the thought and idea of building a Western Hemisphere canal was being discussed, these were the two locations that were being debated where the likelihood of a canal should be built. And Nicaragua had some positive traits here, even though it's a larger, wider country than the isthmus narrow territory of Panama. They had this large waterway or lake that could be connected. So there were a lot of people pushing for Nicaragua to be the canal area. But ultimately, we know it's this thin territory of Panama where the canal is going to be cut into. So that will be the ultimate choice. And so there's some interesting history there related to Panama that we want to go through. Here's this political cartoon of Teddy Roosevelt excavating the canal. He literally doesn't do the work himself, of course, but it happens during his presidency. And you can see he's scooping dirt on to Bogota. That's the capital of Colombia, which I'll explain there in a minute. We see a new treaty that allows the United States to build this canal, and of course the shipping interests waiting to be able to utilize the canal so that they could go from the Atlantic to the Pacific or vice versa much more quickly and efficiently. So we need to discuss the Panamanian Revolution. To help us, we'll look at these maps. So look at the pre-revolution borders. Panama is green here because it's in the Colombian territory. It was part of Colombia. Look at, there's Bogota from that political cartoon we just looked at, the capital of Colombia. Here, the post-Panamanian Revolution, we see Panama a separate color than Colombia. Well, that's indicating that it had separated and become an independent nation. So what happened here? Why did Panama have a revolution? Well, of course, the Panamanians wanted to be free and independent, but they really didn't have the means to be able to fight and separate and become independent from Colombia. They would need some help. And who do you think the help came from? Well, of course, it came from the United States. You know, the United States wanting to build a canal and using the Panamanian territory We offered money to Colombia to have territorial rights to build a canal, and Colombia said no. Now, it wasn't because they weren't interested in us building the canal, but they were just trying to extort more money from the United States. They wanted a higher price tag. Well, no one says no to Teddy Roosevelt. He didn't take Colombia's extortion efforts kindly. And so instead of renegotiating, he authorized the use of force with U.S. naval gunboats and U.S. Marines to go down into Panama and support the Panamanians in their attempt to become a free and independent country. And of course, once that was successfully achieved, the United States then would negotiate with Panama, who would be happy to negotiate with the United States to develop a canal in their newly formed country. So once that occurred, there's a treaty that's signed. This treaty gives a 10-mile wide territorial control within Panama to excavate and build the canal. Of course, we compensated Panama with some significant funds, $10 million. We gave them yearly checks of $250,000 to be able to not only build, but then also control the canal. And I need to tell you that we do not control the canal any longer. We've given that back, and we'll talk about that later on in the semester. But throughout the 1900s, the United States controlled the traffic in and out, and of course protected the canal so no one would harm it in any way, which would harm American military and economic interest also. I want to get into the construction of the canal a little bit. Here's some images. Take a look at this. This is a concrete mixer, and it's massive in size. All right, you can kind of see the scale there when you compare it to the railroad cars that are down below and behind. So a lot of concrete was used in the development of this canal, and particularly in the building of these doors, these locks. Again, look at the railroad line. There's a railroad car there. There's a gentleman standing here on the floor of this concrete lock system, just to kind of give you the scope and scale of these doors. Are massive. These doors open and close, enabling the holding of water, kind of like rectangular pools. I'll show you that more in a minute. We needed to develop new tools of excavation, some earth movers, and of course a lot of railroad usage to be able to carry supplies in, as well as to help carry the dirt and rock out as we're excavating the canal zone. The French had tried to build a canal in Panama before the United States, but they were unsuccessful. Part of that is because of not having appropriate tools and innovated technology, but mostly is because of malaria. Many of the workers that the French construction company utilized died because of malaria. Remember, malaria is mal, bad, area. That's Latin for air. So malaria comes from this idea that people were getting sick from bad air, breathing in bad air. And of course, we come to find out later that malaria was contracted from mosquito bites. But the world, and the French particularly, didn't have this medical science knowledge just yet, and so they weren't able to counteract the high deaths because of the tropical diseases such as malaria. But later on, the United States, conducts the endeavor to build the project. We started in 1904. We finished the project in 1914, right before the breakout of World War I. So think about the interesting timing of that. And of course, the cost, big price tag in this time, $330 million. But if you think about it in terms of the longevity and the usefulness of this canal, particularly for commercial interest, $330 million is really not that expensive of a price tag. And this could come across as hyperbole, that the construction of the canal represents one of the most impressive 20th century innovations, but I really don't think that it is hyperbole. It is, I think, supported by fact. if you look at the construction story, and of course the engineering of the canal and how it works, it is really truly an impressive story, and something that you might be interested in reading about if you have an interest in these types of subjects. I can recommend some good reading material if you're interested. Some other pictures of the canal. You can see a dam here that was built, which of course helps to create these man-made lakes. This is Gatun Lake and the waterways that the ships sail through. The dam is also important because it helped to develop hydroelectricity, which brought electricity to one of the most impoverished areas in the world. So there's a lot of positive benefits to this canal, both for the world and as well as Panama itself. And then this image shows you ships going in and out of the canal by way of one of the lock systems. So this is a lock style canal, and I'll explain the locks and how they work in just a moment. So the purpose of the canal, of course, is to link the Atlantic with the Pacific so that ships could go much quicker. This would prevent shipping traffic having to go around the continent of South America, which is one of the most dangerous waterways in all of the globe. The water between South America and the continent of Antarctica is quite dangerous in certain times of the year. So we get to maneuver without going beyond South America, and of course just a much more efficient, quicker time, which is economically advantageous. Here's the lock system. So you can see in this picture in the top left, the ship is sitting in one of the locks. And notice along each side of the ship is a rail system where you have these locomotive train cars that hook themselves up to the ships by way of ropes and cables, and they literally pull the ships through the locks. So you can see a ship here is approached one of the lock doors. The lock door opens and the ship and then is pulled into the next lock. The ship closes behind, and then water is pumped into this lock, raising the elevation of the ship. The next lock door is open, and then the ship is pulled into the next lock. Lock door shuts. More water is pumped from the previous lock, raising the ship again so that it reaches the elevation of the waterway here on the other side of this locked door, opening you into one of the man-made lakes. Like here you see the Gatun Lake. And then as you can see, the ship travels on its own until it gets to the other side of the canal, which has other lock systems. And you can see here the locks descend so that it reaches the Pacific Ocean elevation. So it's an amazing canal engineering structure. I want to show you time-elapsed photography of the canal, so you just kind of get a sense of what it's like to go through the Panama Canal. So you can see here this cruise ship with some of its passengers excitedly waiting to experience the movement into the first lock system that they're approaching. So you can see the door open, comes in, water's filling up, it raises the ship. The next lock door opens, moves forward, raises the ship. Next door opens, raises the ship, and then it opens up into Gatun Lake, and then travels under its own power as it continues to the other side towards the Pacific. So now we're approaching the Pacific side of the canal lock system. Here, water will be removed from that lock, lowering the ship so they can continue on. And once again, another lock system. And now the cruise liner crosses the bridge of the Americas out into the Pacific. So that's how the Panama Canal works. Some interesting facts, of course, it cuts down a lot of miles. The canal itself is approximately 50 miles in length. You might have wondered in that time elapse, how much time does it take to get from one side to the other to cross the Panama Canal, and it takes about 8 hours total trip from one side to the other. Ships pay according to tonnage, all right, in terms of weight. And so some interesting facts here. The lowest toll paid was this gentleman right here swimming the Panama Canal. Richard Halliburton paid 36 cents in 1928 to be able to get through the Panama Canal. And in 2008, the largest toll was paid by this cruise ship, the Disney Magic, paid $331,200 to be able to navigate through the Panama Canal. Moving on to the next topic, the Roosevelt Colliery. The term colliery just simply means extension, and what the extension is referring to is the Monroe Doctrine. So in the early 1800s, we had President Monroe, who issued a policy called the Monroe Doctrine, and that was a statement to the world, and particularly the European powers, that they are not to mess with the Western Hemisphere, particularly if they had any colonies that were trying to become free and independent, that the United States would protect the Western Hemisphere nations' desire and quest for independence. And here, we've already had the Monroe Doctrine kind of in place since that time, but Roosevelt extends that policy, kind of puts another layer of intentionality on the Monroe Doctrine with the Roosevelt Colliery, where he states that the position of the United States is that we will be the international police force of the world, again, protecting democratic nations or groups who want to be free and democratic. So you can see this political cartoon with Teddy Roosevelt, this big, gun on a battleship of the Great White Fleet, aimed at a European power to protect peoples and their desire for freedom and independence. So again, this asserts the United States into this position that we're kind of familiar with in our lifetimes, of the United States interacting in the world on behalf of freedom and people's quest to be free. This is a famous political cartoon of Teddy Roosevelt, showing you here down the caption as the world's constable, or the world's sheriff, showing him flipping his billy club around. Again, enacting the big stick policy metaphor. Here showing the United States to be the world's police force. Another political cartoon with the same motif of Teddy Roosevelt carrying the big stick and then just kind of dragging his gunboats around. This is the Great White Fleet, right? Kind of like his little toy, right? In order to be able to protect American interests in the world, in this case, in the Caribbean. Now we want to address this global issue, the war between Russia and Japan. So you see this political cartoon, Russia kind of bloodying Japan in this great naval battle. This is the Russo-Japanese War. And this battle is the Battle of Tsushima right here in this map. The war took place in 1904 through 1905 between Russia and Japan. And you can see it's not only naval battles, but there's also some land battles as it relates to Korea. And really what they're vying for control over is this territory in China called Manchuria, right? So think about that. The Chinese are kind of in the middle between these two powers, Russia and Japan, trying to land grab their own imperialistic effort of conquering control of Manchuria. The reason why both countries want Manchuria is because there's mineral resources there that would be useful for their industrial development, and particularly for Japan, who doesn't have natural mineral resources on its island archipelago. It's really looking to the mainland of Asia to be able to acquire those resources so that they can continue its development, its modernization, its industrialization, and continue to rise to become a modern world power, as we see that they will do in World War II. But this war in 1904 is really kind of the beginnings of showing the world that Japan has arrived in a military context. And this war seemed to be a destabilizing event, and so Teddy Roosevelt takes a stand as a mediator and invites diplomats from both sides to come to the United States, to Portsmouth, Maine, in 1905 to try to figure out a way to find a peaceful end to the war. And he's successful, and that was seen as such an important endeavor that Teddy Roosevelt was given the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906. We've talked about the Great White Fleet before. Here's an excellent black and white image of the Great White Fleet steaming across the open waters. And what you have during the Roosevelt presidency is the Great White Fleet being ordered on a worldwide peaceful mission across the globe. And you can notice stops along the way. See all these red dots are ports visited. This was a visual demonstration to the world that the United States had acquired great Navy assets and put them in the conversation as one of the great powers of the world.